excellent presentation. And for those of you that were here at 11 o'clock, you heard Natalia Lopez talking about good citizenship from a school effectiveness perspective. So she anticipated to you that you will hear more about the way the profiles of good citizenship are estimated. And we have the expert here, Diego Carrasco, of the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, that is going to tell you more about it. Diego, please.
Thank you, Magda. I'm just going to start sharing my slide first. Can you see my slides now, right? Cool. Okay, my name is Diego. This manuscript was prepared with David Torres. He's a researcher from the Escuela de Psicología in the same university that I work with. What we're proposing here is a different approach of how to see, how to inquiry comparability across measures. So instead of relying on a continuous latent variable, like the models of confirmatory factor analysis or even item response theory, we are trying to use latent classes between different countries. And what we are arguing is that the application of latent classes may require like a different conceptual understanding of what these ordinal or nominal models are doing to claim that we have comparability or lack of comparability between responses. So firstly, what I'm going to do is to give a brief overview of what are citizenship norms endorsement or good citizenship norms. These are mainly different phrases that express what is required from citizens. This includes a variety of different duties such as obeying the law, voting in political elections, and helping others. And there are different lists of batteries included in different political surveys of opinion. Citizenship norms are often expressed as inductive norms. That means that these claim things that are considered desirable by a group of people or that are sanctioned or expected from adults. These norms express what people is owed to do, so what is their duty, instead of what people tends to do. In this other case, these are often considered descriptive norms. This kind of research is pretty relevant for citizenship and civic education. These kind of norms tend to predict people's behavior, and they orient what people are expected to do in different groups. And we have previous research that is possibly related to political participation in protests, and following the rule of law. One of the basic research aim in the case of large-scale assessment is that, in particular in the case of citizenship norm endorsement among students, is to address what are the norms that students tend to endorse more and how and why. But at the same time, if we want to make comparisons between countries that have different educational institutions and different political institutions, we also need to do some sort of tweak or some sort of concern regarding if the kind of models that we have are actually comparable across these different countries. Oh, sorry, I put the wrong button. So as Linda was saying, to the exercise of making comparisons between countries, we're often going to face two different kind of problems. One of the challenges is the problem of multidimensionality. That means that we have a collection of responses, and the most likely scenario is that a single dimension is not enough to represent all of the responses at once. So we cannot easily classify like the endorsement of norms with only a dimension saying from good to bad if people is endorsing all the norms that we can conceive. The other problem is that regardless of the kind of measurement model that we can envision or try to implement, is if these are comparable across the groups that we with which we want to make inferences to in the population. So in the case of citizenship norms, there is a convergence among different authors and conceptual models. that they classify this different collection of norms in different groups. So you would have, let's say, conventional norms or more engagement norms and so on. So there is way much more agreement regarding what to do, given the case that we have a different collection of norms, and we might need to have some sort of differentiation among all the norms that we can think of. Regarding the approaches of response models that people are using in previous research, the most prominent ones are factor analysis. So that means that people are using a continuous latent variable to display the propensity of people responding the endorsement of two different norms. There are other approaches such as IRT, like partial theory models that have been used in ICCS 2016. And the more maybe current approaches or more newer approaches that also Linda was mentioning is this idea of using latent classes. In this later approach, the difference is that instead of thinking of classifying students among in a wide continuum, what we're trying to do is to differentiate classifications of the students. That means that we need like a subset of taxonomy or a typology, and then we can classify different response patterns. So in this previous research, in this previous approach from Hogg and Osser, what they have used is a specific way of using latent classes in which they include the countries as a fixed effect to the class location. That means that the amount of people within each class is going to vary between countries, but they also include this fixed effect of countries over the Ethan thresholds. In the idea of using these explications to achieve metric equivalence, borrowing the same term that is being used in, as metric equivalence from the confirmatory factor analysis literature. What we are proposing is to rely on the structurally homogeneous model, because we want to preserve the response pattern interpretability among more than one country at the same time. And the main presentation of today is to make that point and make that argument in a full-fledged way. So I'm just going to comment briefly on the method. So we're using the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study from 2016. So this is a collection of 24 countries, representative samples of 8 graders. These include several countries from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. In particular, we are using the 12 citizenship norms included in ICCS 2016. And these are the collection of items that we're going to model. They are on the figure on the right. And what we're going to do is that we're going to dichotomize the original responses between high importance and low importance. And we are making this classification not to restrict the variance. It's mainly because we want to make comparisons with the previous research conducted by Hogg and Osser. All these items are phrased as inductive norms. So that means that you express what is ideal, not what people do. And what we want to extract with the response model is where the most likely pattern of response across all the students between different countries. So what we're doing is that we have a collection of items with which we're going to classify them regarding their, let's call it popularity or like the level of endorsement. So that means the percentage of endorsement that they display among all students. And to account for the difference regarding how students endorse these different items, we're going to use groups. So that means unobserved groups that are going to classify all the most likely patterns of responses across different countries. And we're going to use the countries as different examples. And what the countries are going to do is that they're going to preserve the same pattern of response for each class, but the amount of students within each class is going to vary per country. So firstly, just a brief overview regarding what we're doing. This model is often called the structurally homogeneous model. It's described by Cancras and Vermund. In practical terms, this model application, as I said before, searches for a varying number of latent classes across countries to represent the most likely response pattern. This model generates latent classes with the same expected response pattern in each country. And what is varying by the inclusion of the fixed effect of the countries is the proportion of each class between countries among the students. So what I'm displaying now is the main result. So it's what are the most likely amount of groups that we may need to describe the full dispersion of response patterns among the students. So we have a full group of students that are pretty much are telling us that all the citizenship norms are important. And even within that group, the less important or the less endorsed citizenship norm is joining a political party. Then we have a group of students called the duty-based, which are characterized by endorsing the norms of following the rule of law, the respect of authorities, and the importance of work. And they are also more willing to vote in contrast to other profiles. Then we have the socially engaged that tends to endorse more the participation with the community. Simultaneously, they also endorse the rule of law and the respect of authorities. And then secondly, we have the monitorial group that seems to be more critical. So they are less likely to respect the authorities. And at the same time, they tend to be a little bit more engaged with participation in the local community. And finally, we have a small group of students that hardly endorse any citizenship norm. So this is the representation of these different response patterns that we can extract with this model, that we can generate with this model. So if we discuss what are the competing choices, the other choice of modeling that is akin to be interpreted as a metric equivalence model is the partially homogeneous model. This model specification is going to do is to include additional fixed effects from the countries to the endorsement of each item at the same time. So these are in the acyclic diagram that I have on the left. These are represented by this additional line from the X to the items. What we're claiming is that this model in particular is allowing that the pattern of response between country also varies and can vary too much. So that means that when we are claiming that a certain class is such and such in a country, that may not mean the same thing when we're talking regarding a different country. In words of Catherine Massing, she's mainly saying that this kind of a specification is functionally equivalent to differential item functioning. This is the name that people would use within the IRT literature to say that an item might not be comparable among two groups. So the main idea of the approaches of partial invariance is that, let's say that if we have 12 items, we may lose some comparability, let's say over 2 or 3 items, but we will still can claim comparability with the rest of the other items that are present in the model. What is happening with the partially homogeneous model is that the variation is for all the countries. So one way to display this idea is that we are generating the response pattern for one of the classes. This is the monitorial group. In the thick line, we are representing how the response pattern would look like for the approach that we are proposing, whereas the other rest of the thinner lines are the expected response pattern for each country for the same latent class. So the problem that we see in conceptual terms and in substantive terms is that this specification is allowing too much variability regarding the response pattern so we can make the same claims when we want to make inferences. Inferences such as a certain country has more monitorial students than the other, and other inferences such as, I don't know, like students with more political sophistication are more prone to be monitorial in 2 countries at the same time. What we're saying here is that this approach behaves as a descriptive model. So it's fully saturating the full the response pattern. And if we compare the classification error between these 2 approaches, the gain is not that much. So we see a gain of, let's say, I think it's about like 0.06%. So it's really low. So we're willing to sacrifice some of the precision in the overall pattern of responses to achieve a more interpretable response model to represent what the students are answering to these different indicators.
Diego, just to let you know that you have about 2-3 minutes left.
Okay, so I'm going to just go briefly regarding the interpretations of each of the profiles. So firstly, we have the comprehensive ones. These tend to be around 39% across all the countries, whereas in the case of Italy, this is a larger group, is about 0.71. Regarding the socially engaged, tends to be lower in the case of Italy, whereas in the rest of the countries as a whole is about a third of the population of students. The duty-based is a small percentage of the students, it's about 12, whereas in the case of Italy, it's about 9%. The monitorial students is 0.8 in Italy, whereas in the average of the country is about 12. And finally, the anomic type of students. So these are the students that do not endorse largely any of the citizenship norms, is pretty low. In the case of Italy, is about 1%, whereas in the rest of the country is about 4%. So if we look at each of the countries regarding the precision of the response model, we have a variety of how the classification error behaves. So in some countries it's about 0.05, whereas in other countries 0.8. In the case of Italy, it's 0.08. And what we think is that it's better to have a model that would have some error that we know about, but we can still make the same kind of inferences that we are looking for from the beginning. So the improvement in fit from the so-called partially homogeneous models is allowing too much variability across the countries, which we don't want. We prefer a more parsimonious model, so that means less parameters, willing to sacrifice some of the precision of the error in the classification, because we think that 0.06 is not that much. And in some cases, I think this an in-between approach between the partially homogeneous one and the structurally homogeneous one is to use a partial invariance approach. That means that we can allow some differential item functioning over a few of the items, which we will lose some of the generalizability while conserving the generalizability to the rest of the other items. So you can find more information regarding this study in this link. This is part of one of the chapters included in this book that we wrote with several colleagues that are present in the INVALSI in this panel, and we are still promoting in other conferences. So many thanks to everyone. Hopefully you can have different questions to this study and comments.
Thank you very much, Diego. I want to first add some information. In the last INVALSI conference, Diego also delivered a training illustrating for those interested more in the methodological part or how to apply this kind of analysis. So you can find that on YouTube. Just feel free to ask me on him to share that information if it's of interest. And now please address any questions that you may have, please. Linda.
Yeah, I have a question for the comprehensive section. So they basically ticked off the boxes like this norm is important, this one is important, this one is important. So how can you maybe also control for the fact that some students just ticked off the same boxes due to laziness, like and like really differentiate between the real comprehensive ones and like maybe the lazy ones, like saying, oh, yes, this is important, of course. Is there a way that you can control for that, or
you can at least make let's call it like a diagnosis to see if this is the case. So given that you have a large collection of items in the rest of the background questionnaire, if you have the suspicious that the the largest group, this is the comprehensive one, is just ticking boxes because is kind of like an unattentive respondent. So let's say that he or she just wants to finish early, so it's just ticking boxes really fast. You can create an index of that behavior, looking at all the responses that are in the same direction. So let's say that you have the survey and you're claiming that the behavior is just ticking boxes at the right. So you can create a propensity score to measure that behavior outside the measures that you want to assess. I've run a few of those explorations because our main concern when we're feeding this model for the first time was the claim that the comprehensive group is just an all-around group. So it's people just saying everything is important and that's it. And this doesn't have any substantive conceptual interpretation. So we build up one of those indexes and it's not necessarily a predictive one. So we have the suspicion that the comprehensive group is not, cannot be accounted by the behavior of an extreme response pattern. But we haven't published any of those results. So it's something that we need to look for in the future in more detail. But the main issue would be to make a comparison between this idea that this is just bias in the response pattern, and that extreme responses can sometimes, even if they look like bias, if they have a substantive meaning. We can see this kind of responses in other kind of measures, for example, in bullying measures, and also in consumption of substances, that they tend to be either on the low side or either in the high up side. And the most likely scenario, sometimes we think that these are like an unexpected response pattern, that we might think this is too extreme. But other times I have the suspicion that they mean something in particular. Either this be that they don't engage in a behavior, or either that they are in the extreme of the endorsement of an attitude, an idea, or in this case, a norm, or a collection of norms.
Yes. Okay. Super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. I don't have a question. I just want to add to this conversation because, Italy is part of this study. And it's one of the group in which the comprehensive group is the largest. I think it's 70%, if I remember correctly. So it's very important to account for these issues of social desirability. And when I had a conversation with Laura Palmerio, which is conducting the survey, that was the first question. And then I had the same question from people in different countries, like in Germany and so on. So I really would like to encourage you to publish this research and show us those corrected scores, because that you will have a broad audience. Any other questions in the audience? Online or offline? I guess not. Then feel free to follow up with us, with Diego as well, and let's move on.